record to the cloud. Okay, and there is a way to show, live transcript, but that I can't see that. I can't find that one here. Okay, well, that's the Zoom testing. So, all right, so we're going to talk about basically the stomach, and it'll be divided into several sections, so to speak, and okay, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, now when we look at the standard textbook, it describes digestive system as a hollow tube, which is made of a pipe, sac, coils, and a sphincter. So it's about, for those who tuned in the metric system, it's about 6.5 meters, and for the Luddites is 21 feet. It's actually it's more than a tube, which is how we were taught about, basically. But it's actually, and one you can use a more poetic term like an enchanted forest teeming with ecosystem, which is the microbiome that is the big research ongoing in a very hot field. Okay, to digress, when the Human Genome Project was started, there was a guesswork as to how many genes a human genome will have. People were disappointed. There were only like 22 million unique genes, But when you look at all the microbes that are part of our ecosystem, we come up to about 23 million more unique genes, So it's a huge number, from 20,000 to 22 million. So it's a number. And I think there was in 2016, there was a very erudite, well-written book by Ed Yonk called I Contain Multitudes, and it talks about it was a tour de force of microbiome flora all across different animal species, to including human beings, and he talks about the interconnectedness of various kingdoms. Okay, so now this is, some of you may remember this, that there was a campaign, especially, well, I think most of you are young enough, you may not remember this. Okay, and this was rekindled during the Second World War, the gospel. It was started during the First World War by Hoover to save food for the soldiers, clean plate. And this is my wife's favorite joke, that when she was growing up in the 50s in Wisconsin, she was told, clean up your plate. There's children starving in India. And when she married me, she was convinced that they were right, that they were not too far off from the truth. So that was a campaign, and I think that's her only joke. And this was the pledge actually that was taken. So this almost floored me. So I, being a member in good standing, hereby agree I will finish all the food in the plate until Uncle Sam has licked the Japs and Hitler. Okay, so that was for serious. This was, practice. And I don't know if anybody remembers that. I think all of you are probably too young to remember this, but there you have it. Now, this is interesting that this was, I just added this.
Knitting. So now plus or minus a couple of feet. So this is in here. It's the latest thing. So for this is otherwise known as the food to poop tube. Okay. And what happens is, this is plus or minus a couple of feet, depending on whether or not you're 6'7" or 5'2", is how long your gut actually is. So this is the food side. Okay, now I'm supposed to kind of, okay, and then it's origami. So this bunch of pillows here are your internal organs, okay? And then you can see that this pink bit is actually your small intestine. Now you can notice that the small intestine is not that small, and the big intestine is actually quite small. So the small intestine, you can see, and I won't stretch it out because I'll go past the cameras. And this is the poop side of things. And you can see. Now, and it's long. It's probably 8 meters, 21, 22 feet long, and it's all origamied into us. But what happens is, as you're eating, and the food goes down the esophagus, and then into the stomach, and then into the small intestine as it goes.
Okay, so this is another Asian Brit, and it's important that this is a lecture on obesity, and which ties in with food intake, and so I'll have some slides from him, but and he has written varieties of book about the interconnectedness of microbiome genetics, as well as, and he's a PhD in genetics, by the way, and he's written about diet, and so this was a lecture at the Royal Society, and from the Michael Faraday lecture halls. So it's a very worthwhile talk, and I've
knitting.
borrowed a couple of his slides. And actually, there is a pattern for those of you who are into knitting. You can actually, there is a PDF that I removed the slide, but actually you can knit the whole entire gut. So I think that will keep you busy for a couple of years, I would imagine. So I've divided the talk into various sections. The journey of food, which talks about the basic anatomy, physiology, and just to make sure that I am well read, throw in a couple of biochemistry slides. So, and for especially for people like Peter here. Okay, now there are, I did a class on taste, so this slide may be familiar from those who took it. And when I talked about respiration, we talked about the difference between the larynx and the glottis and epiglottis, and how Mother Nature put a nice little flap so we won't choke, and even at the risk, type of thing. So that's, we talked about the two separate airways, and still it's an evolutionary, misfit, so to speak, that still little babies, they have the teeth, but their trachea is not well formed. So that's why they're much more likely to choke on a hot dog rather than pieces like grape, so that, that's a hazard. But again, that was very important because speech was equally important. So larynx, when it migrated down. So what we talked about that in the respiration. But now this is a few things or missed things about taste, that, we just think that this was a slide that I had used, that the taste is not nicely, discretely divided, because a lot of the taste is smell. And, we are obviously our smell is not as weak as we were taught to believe, And there were some we had when we talked about the smell, we talked about as well when you lie down, so there are a lot of receptors that, and this is the flavor and taste, so there are two types of olfaction that takes place. The gustation means the taste, and the olfaction. So retronasal, when the food gets behind, and then the aromatic oils get back into the nose and again stimulate your sense of, taste. And so there are varieties of papilla that, and interestingly, somebody at University of Florida is doing a lot of cutting edge research on taste, and there are nicely, the pungiform papilla are in the front, the other folate type are on the sides, okay, and then the other types of papilla, the appearance, these are measured on the visual appearance. And this have, again, it's not just the anatomical appearance, but there are various ion channels which are actually stimulated, and there are various genes that control this. So it's a lot more complicated than just the external appearance of tongue would look like, okay? So, and again, and so this is, and obviously the sensation from the nose directly goes into the brain. So, okay, and especially so when you have a cold, that's when the time the food does not taste good at all. And obviously those who were bad enough to get COVID in the first thing would remember as to how bad the food taste was. So, okay, so enough about taste. Okay, and not only that, taste is primal. Like even babies, even newborn babies love sweet, so, okay. And also there are dedicated taste cells, there are about 10,000 of that with different perception. And these are replaced from time to time, okay, every 10 days, And the main evolutionary construct is that it scans for toxins, okay. And so, and there are special genes for the sweet receptors, and these are all transmitted by new types of neurotransmitters called G protein coupled receptors. While on the other hand,
Yes, sir.
substances like salt is conducted by ion channels. Okay, and so, and there are varieties of nerves, and this is the part where the brain intervenes, controls actively the process of digestion at both ends, the front end and at the bottom end. And there are, it is important enough mechanism that varieties of nerves are purely dedicated to the function of controlling, the glossopharyngeal nerve and, the varieties of and the nerve, the maxillary nerve that controls the motion of your jaw, and the mandibular nerve. So the varieties of cranial nerves are linked. And it is apparent that those who have had a stroke have difficulty with swallowing. And then a lot of time the cause of their further deterioration is aspiration pneumonia. So that's an important thing, but that's not the only area where nervous system intricates. But I'm going to focus a lot more on the different nervous system that you may or may not be aware of that is involved at a very fundamental level with process of digestion. Okay, and again, as to how taste is, like how genetics is hardwired, that this is, those of you who know politics, as to George Bush, the senior, when he was a president. I'm the president of the United States. I don't have to eat broccoli. I don't like broccoli. Okay, and that was his famous, statement that he is associated with. And a lot of that is these are people who have this particular genetic gene abnormality. They would taste this particular chemical PTC, and that's in Brussels sprouts and broccoli, so that tastes bitter. And about half of the Caucasian population have this thing. They cannot, and the same way as cilantro also is hardwired type of thing. So it tries out at the molecular level as to now, as we go further and further by reductionism, we are learning the role of genetics as well as the molecular biology at the gut, at literally the gut level, so to speak. Okay, and we talked about taste, at the tongue, and the more important function is also chewing. Okay, and that has a fascinating history. That this is back in the Victorian era, or around that time in the early 20th century. There was a guy that, I don't know if any of you heard the name Horace Fletcher. Okay, if anybody has heard the name, please chime in. I mean, that's, you get A+ in the class. Okay, all right. Horace Fletcher was a nutritionist, a businessman, and a self-promoter, and he promoted the idea that chewing is, the big thing, make the food liquid, and that would help you with the food shortage. It will help you with the nutrition, digestion, obesity. Tons of books, and became very popular, and became like a cult called Fletcherism. So to speak, it's like chew the food until it's liquid. So I'm sure it was probably the older version of juicing, which is in vogue right now, as to taking all your vegetables and putting in a blender and gulping it down. So that may have been the forerunner of it. And he had a catchy phrase that he'd come up with: nature will castigate those who do not masticate. Okay, I'm glad he said masticate and not the other word, which was, so otherwise he would have been not even more popular. Okay, and this reminded me that in the early days, my escape thing was Bob Newhart's show. And in one of the episodes of Bob Newhart was that his wife gets irritated with him because he insists on chewing the food 32 times that his mom told him. So that was trivia for TV aficionados, Okay, and again, the brain tells you as to when you're hungry, and basically you start, obviously, I think hopefully everybody has had some lunch, otherwise you'd be hearing your stomach growling or rumbling. But the nice word for that is in medicine, that I always enjoyed the word borborygmi. Okay, I mean, I thought that was a cute word, And for those of you who are more literary minded, that's an onomatopoetic word, so to speak, So I think, I don't know the exact origin of it, but it just sounds, so.
Onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia, right, exactly. So that is, that's I mispronounced it, sorry. Okay, and getting back to the science part of it, those who are more carbohydrate eaters, they have more copies of amylase, which digests the starch in the right from the beginning. The process of digestion starts right from your mouth, and the various glands that are underneath the mandible, the parotid gland, the submandibular glands, their job is to secrete the saliva, and it has the amylase enzyme, which starts the process. And you don't really need a food, even just a simple mechanical stimulus can do this. And then this is important even at the level of babies. The baby's drool has lipase, so that is able to digest, start the process of digestion of the mother's milk. And and again, a word or two about teeth. Teeth are extremely sensitive. They can detect grit as small as 10 micron. Okay, and one couple of other facts about taste, that 1 in 4 person is a super taster. So they're extremely sensitive to. So to them, the coffee would be bitter. Or I know one blessing of that is that they'll not become alcoholic, because alcohol, the bitterness would be hard for them to get used to, type thing. So, and I think my wife is like that. She's Wisconsinite but does not like beer and cannot drink coffee. So it's just it tastes bitter, and even tiramisu cake, she just like, oh, don't like it, it's bitter. So so some people are so-called, just like the way in eyesight, some people have more than 4 receptors. We have 3, RGB color sensors in our eye, but some people are gifted to have 1 extra. And so that's some genetic quirks of human evolution. Okay, and again, this just gives us the idea about the formation of smell, the varieties of the olfactory bulb, and it's a direct pathway from your nose. So that's one of the easy ways to get an infection. So that's why the vaccine from meningitis, is important. But this again digresses, so there are varieties of hair cells called cilia, and again, so that's has tuned our sense of smell. And this was important enough that the smell receptors were, it was a relatively recent discovery that Linda Buck and a guy named Axel were the Nobel Prize winners in 2004 for discovery of the receptors, the smell receptors in the nose. So just a little piece of side history. Okay, all right. Now getting back to the anatomy, this is the inside anatomy of the, it's just a hollow tube, but when you look at that, it's a fairly sophisticated anatomical system that it starts out with epithelial or simple layers at the bottom, and is surrounded by mucosa, which is a layer which secretes mucus. And there are 2 types of muscle fibers, the longitudinal muscle fibers and circular muscle fibers. So, and the reason for that is it's important for conduction of peristalsis that takes place. And along with that, what I was referring to earlier was, let's see if I can get a pointer. Okay. Yeah. Here, this is the part. Oops, went back a long way. So this is the Meissner complex. These are the tiny nerve fibers, and they and the Auerbach's nerve plexus that are in between the 2 layers, and these are the nerve fibers that are important and control the part of the peristalsis. Okay, and controls the motor activity. It has a role in secretions. Okay, and next slide will.
In the.
Oops. Okay, and there are about almost 200 million neurons that are in between these layers, and they have not only conduct the peristalsis and control the motion of these fibers, but they also have a role in secreting the important neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine. Okay, it controls the sensory information as well as the neurosecretory information, and it controls the rhythmic motion of the esophagus and stomach. And this can actually be recorded just the way we record electrocardiogram and brain waves. This can be recorded by electrogastrogram, so to speak. Okay, all right. So that's, and I'll have more to say about it as we go further down. Okay, now before we get down, it's nice to get a little bit of what endoscopy and the thing that has replaced the barium X-rays. When we were in medical school, obviously that was, were like upper GI and lower GI. That was the state of the art at that level. But in the 1960s, an interesting person with a cute name of Basil Isaac Hirschwitz from South Africa to UK to US. The gastroenterologist discovered the endoscopy or fiber optic endoscopy, and it gradually, with advancing technology, that became the tool. So much so that it was disappointing to me that I used to consult the fellow gastroenterologist when we couldn't find the cause of chest pain. I said, okay, it might be your stomach. And these guys would not even come to see the patient. Oh, just send him to the lab, we'll scope them, and then we'll see him at that time. I mean, the art of talking to the patient was totally lost. So I used to just, okay, well, if that's the way you want to do it. So we'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about how specialists are turning into technicians, And so this is just the basic view, just to give us an insider's view. So I copied a lecture's video, and this will give us
in the esophagus, which is the tube just past the epiglottis that Phil referred to, and we are pushing the scope down, and we come up to the GE junction, and you can already see that the color changes. We're now in the stomach, and this is the distal part, the further part of the stomach. This is us looking back at how we were entering the stomach, so-called retroflex view. And these are the folds of the stomach, and in the distance you can see the.
Okay, so this gives you an idea what the gastroenterologists do, type of thing. And now, obviously, there are a lot of other things, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to put. There are a whole slew of videos from the American Society of Gastroenterologists, but those are copyrighted. You cannot, put them on the slide. So I would have to go back and forth. Okay, if I don't know if Joe has signed in or not. Oh yeah, he has. So he can jump in whenever he feels that thing. So Joel, feel free to add your experience whenever you feel like. Okay, all right. So, and now this is
positioned in the esophagus, which is the.
Let me pause it. Now this almost floored me, type of thing. That this was, I don't know how I even found it. This is a doctor named Dr. Akira Horiuchi. He's the head of the Digestive Disease Center in Nagano Prefecture, Central Japan. And he's doing his own colonoscopy and doing it, type of thing. So I don't know whether to, you can just take it for whatever its value, type of thing. So, but I just thought that it was, whether it was hilarious or outrageous or what have you, But this is again, a lot of doctors have this thing that I do as a cardiologist. I remember the letter to the editor to the New England Journal that there was a surgeon. He developed atrial fibrillation, which is, as most of you know probably, is a rapid heartbeat of the top chamber. And he was alone in the office by himself. And he thought, oh, this was a life-threatening rhythm. So he decided to do electric shock cardioversion himself. So, and there was nobody in the office. And he did, and he put the pedals in and pressed the button. Luckily for him, it worked, that he was able to synchronize everything, and actually wrote a letter to the New England Journal. So, I mean, it was unheard of, as to because it's a painful shock, for those of you who are James Bond fans. Remember that in one of the recent Casino Royale, there is an episode where the Bond is poisoned and he goes into fibrillation. And obviously the young lady comes and saves his life in his Aston Martin. So anyway, but we're digressing. Okay. And so this is a little bit more details about the enteric nervous system. Sorry, my slide was out of sync here, but that just talks about the same thing that I already alluded to, about the large complex in the submucosal layer, about several hundred million neurons, and they're capable of information processing, motor activity, as well as hormonal secretion type of thing. So it's a very sophisticated underlying neural network that plays a lot of role in just the transit of the food, the storage of the food, the grinding, mixing, and all the necessary function that the digestive system. And these are varieties of nerve cells. And the cell that is intricately involved is something called the interstitial cell of Cajal. And for those of you who may not, Ramonica Cajal was the giant of neuroscience. Okay, and the cell is the cell that is there is named in his memory, type of thing. Okay. So this enteric nervous system, it interacts with gut endocrine system as well the immune system. And so it's a very integral part of how the process is carried out. Okay, and you can see this little cartoon diagram. It shows nicely as to how the varieties of nerves are involved. It has the vagus, which translated means wandering nerve, and it has branches all over. And the varieties of autonomic nervous system is also intricately connected. So you can see how the varieties of nerve fibers play a major role in controlling, these sophisticated, complicated system. Okay, and this is, another diagram of the myenteric ganglion, which is in the middle, and the ICC is the interstitial cell of Cajal. Okay, and the muscle bundles that are layered in between. Okay, and this is an electron micrograph of the Ramonica cell of Cajal, the interstitial cell, which does most of the function. And the waves that are there have a different frequency in different parts. In the stomach, there are general slow waves. It is 3 per minute. And the duodenum, which is the next part, which is about 11 to 12 cycles per minute. In ileum, it's a little less than that, 8 or 9. In colon, it's again slows down. So again, so depending upon which part of the digestive tract is involved, there are various frequencies how these waves are transmitted. Okay, and this is, again, this shows how the one muscle contracts, okay, and then the next part distends, and then the bolus of food is propelled forward. And this is also, again, controlled not just by the nerve cells, but also by the serotonin. Okay, so the behind the bolus contraction and beyond it relaxation that goes on. And that's how the whole process between the two complex is carried out. Okay, and depending upon this, there are varieties of program that after eating, there's the digestion of transit food. Later on, when you're not eating, there is the fasting, the so-called housekeeping program. Okay, that is not digestion. And later on, obviously, at the same time, the energy conversion is going on, which we'll get to later on. Varieties of enzymes are involved along with the absorption. Okay, all right, and this is now a lot of the discovery of this told before we got started that there is a Midwestern connection, and this is in the Mackinac Island and the north end of Michigan, where it's the military hospital. That Dr. William Beaumont was posted there, and this was several years before the Civil War. So, and he ran to a French Canadian named Alexis Saint Martin, and who was shot in the stomach, and there was a fistula, that means an opening that was connected, and through his luck or bad luck, it healed. And so Dr. Beaumont had actually a window to the stomach, and he was able to study the process of digestion. And depending upon the foods that are placed or what he ate, he was able to take out and see what the transit occur, and he was able to study the process of digestion with like a real window thing. And obviously the patient or he was his house servant and was not too happy. He tried to run away, and he managed to recapture him and continued working with him for several years, even after he was transferred to a different fort. Okay, and so he was considered the grandfather of American gastroenterology in the sense that he pioneered and investigated some of these processes with direct observation. This is way before X-rays. And William Beaumont is memorized. There's a well-known suburban hospital in Detroit called William Beaumont Hospital. So that's the part of the medical history. And this was a painting, that was done by, don't remember the artist, but this was, Dr. Beaumont in his military garb, and with the poor patient Alexis Saint Martin surrounded by some assistants. So that's a little piece of history of peristalsis, and it was at Fort Mackinac in Mackinac Island. Okay, and this again, this is a nice little main card.
Even before we have taken the first bite of a meal, the brain sends impulses to the stomach. These impulses start the production of secretions in the stomach, and the upper part of the stomach, which acts as a reservoir, expands. The food passes into the stomach through the cardia at the stomach entrance. This is a muscle that acts like a valve, closing the top of the stomach. The top part of the stomach, the fundus, is where food and the air that we swallow with every bite is collected. This is where the stomach volume starts to adapt. The fundus is an extremely adaptable structure. The more food goes into the stomach, the more it actively expands. In the middle part of the stomach, called the body, gastric juice is produced and mixed with the mass of chewed food. The main component of gastric juice is
I'm sorry, I think
gastric acid. This eliminates bacteria in the food and also helps to prepare the food for the following stages of digestion. The muscular contractions of the stomach wall churn the food mass and mix it with gastric juice. 3 contractions per minute move the food mass back and forth. After a certain time, the contents of the stomach are adequately broken down and mixed, and are passed in small quantities into the intestine via the pylorus. As the stomach empties, it gradually returns to its previous size.
Fair. Science for a...
Okay, so, and it takes about, he didn't say the time, but it takes about 4 hours type of thing. So, yes, I'll have a couple of several slides about acid reflux, Dave. Okay, so this is when the upper layer sphincter is incompetent. That's, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So, but we'll have 2 or 3 slides more about, because that's a very common and very frequent problem. So, what I've divided earlier before, I don't know if when you join in, but I've divided the slide into normal, and then we'll talk about the common diseases. So we'll have some information to say about it. Okay, so this is interesting as to how the stomach, make sure that the particle sizes are less than 2 millimeters, type of thing. So that it really, it's a powerful system type of thing. And then we'll have a few things to say about the acid. Okay. And again, so now the calorie delivery at the about 150 kilocalories per hour that can be absorbed type of thing. And we already talked about Dr. William Beaumont and Alex St. Martin. Now it's interestingly that how food preferences are selected type thing. People eat organ meats, type of thing, and the Inuits actually do eat caribou stomach lining. Okay, so that you can take for whatever it's worth, type of thing as to people do it other organs, but I don't think, stomach is considered a delicacy, in the average American diet, at least, So, but at least, and so nutritious organ meat was promoted during Second World War type of thing, because, and the acceptance varied and had a lot to do with the culture and people's habits type thing. So there were serious campaign about, remarketing or rebranding and encouraging people to use the entire animal body.
Even before.
Okay, and process of digestion, here again, we have it eliminated systematically as to how the particles are broken down by the mechanical actions that start in the mouth, stomach, and then the varieties of chemicals or enzymes or peptides we'll talk about in just a few seconds. And at the same time, the absorption takes place primarily in you saw the earlier picture of the large small bowel, and then later on in the large bowel, it's primarily the absorption of the liquids and water takes place along with that, and the elimination, which is the waste part. And now some of the names that may take you back to high school, such as pepsin, lipase, intrinsic stomach factor. And okay, now again, food and energy are so intricately connected, that other than obviously we take heartbeat and air for granted, but human evolution, it's always been related to the search for food. And primarily that's a way of taking the energy from the universe or sun or a plant product or dairy products or what have you, and converting it into usable energy. So that's the energy mechanism of basic principles of thermodynamics, and just gets down to the base. I think I may have shown part of the slides earlier when we talked about, the 3 main groups, which are broken down proteins are broken down into amino acids, carbohydrates broken down into glucose, and it goes through the infamous Krebs cycle that we talked about. And the fats are broken down into triglycerides and the free fatty acids and varieties of particles, which we may talk about chylomicrons and triglycerides, which are absorbed, some of are absorbed directly, and they're utilized into energy that your cell or your mitochondria can use effectively. It's called adenosine triphosphate. And so these are the varieties of ways how the body converts the energy that is not usable and breaks it down into the molecules, which can be used effectively, type of thing. Okay, and okay, so enough about the biochemistry before all of us fall asleep. Okay, and these are some of the gut peptides, take called ghrelin, which makes one hungry. There are varieties of pancreatic enzymes, which are some of the most powerful enzymes. There are other enzymes which have to do with your appetite. Okay, and there is other enzymes that actually give you the sense of fullness. Okay, so but that again, there are intricately evolved, and there are varieties of roles to play. Okay, and they are secreted in different parts of the body in a very selective manner. Some are secreted in stomach, some are secreted in duodenum, lower down. Okay, type of thing. So and okay, I think somebody's mic is open. I think it might be either Pat or Joel. Okay, I think, yeah, mute.
Yeah, speaking.
Okay, I muted them, so sorry about that. Okay, so these are the varieties of enzymes that we just went over. Okay, now getting down to the other part, which is the more important. The liver has it's a fascinating organ type of thing that and I'm sure that's been known through the Western culture history for a long time, because it figures widely in the tale of Prometheus and the vulture, because liver is one of the few organs that can actually regenerate. So that's why when the poor guy, when the vultures would peck his liver, it would grow back again, only for him to be tortured next day again. So the liver can, healthy liver, it's one of the largest organs in the body type of thing, and weighs about 1.5 kilograms and receives a tremendous amount of blood. And this may surprise you that it has two separate sources of blood supply. The one is called hepatic artery that brings the pure blood from the heart, and the other one is the portal vein, which gets the blood from the intestine peg. So it is a double dual blood supply, and it receives about 13% of the body's blood supply, and it's a busybody organ. It contains huge number of cells, about 300 billions. Okay, and it has varieties of function that we'll go to type thing. The most important, the one important that all of you may recognize is formation of bile, which is in varieties of bile salts that helps in digestion of the food. Along with that, there are other functions that some of you may not be aware of. It has a lot of roles in converting various vitamins to active forms. It also converts fat into energy that a body can utilize. It has a huge role in forming cholesterol and the particles. And that's one of the ways it is related to the discovery of the statin drugs, which has something to do with the LDL receptors in your body, which again revolutionized the treatment of heart disease, back in the 80s. And it also has a role in forming various clotting factors, activates thyroid hormone, various other important chemicals. One, the abbreviation stands for IGF, which is called insulin-derived growth factor. So these are varieties of important organs. Now, one interesting side bit that we may be surprised to see that the Inuits, they will not eat liver because there is a real danger of vitamin A toxicity. And there was an incident of some European explorers who went and they were stranded, and when they finally found some penguins or birds, they ate voraciously, and they all got vitamin A toxicity. So that's one of the risks, of overindulging in the food that's available. So it was an interesting piece of history that some of you may not be aware of. Now, the first successful liver transplant was done in '67 by the famous transplant surgeon, Dr. Starzl. Okay, and because of the liver's capacity to regenerate, one could actually do an adult-to-adult transfer type of thing. It's a somewhat risky, but it's doable type of thing. As that liver can regenerate in both people. And so it's a very complex physiological master organ. Okay, so I think we have said enough about that. And this again shows the anatomical relationship of the various parts as to the gallbladders nestle on the undersurface of the liver. Along with that, and the duct opens up into the first part of the duodenum, and the pancreas is nicely nestled in the curve of the duodenum. And you remember from the endoscopic views of the stomach lining, the first parts of the intestine, which is called duodenum. And the word origin is interesting as to how the word duodenum is. It is about 12 finger breadths. That's how the name came about. Okay, so when there were the early days of dissection, it was measured to be about 12 finger breadths type of thing. And similarly, the second part, so it's about, when you measure in real distance, it's about 10 inches or 25 to 40 centimeters. The next part is called jejunum, okay, which is about 2.5 meters or 8 feet, okay. And the third part is long, which is the ileum, which is about 3 meters, so 9 feet, okay. And the word, for those of you what word for then jejunum means it's empty. When you're dead, the jejunum part is empty type of thing. So, and so that's how the name came about. So some of the word origins are interesting. Now, as we were at the level of the stomach, when the food is digested, and finally after breaking it down to small particles, it enters duodenum. It's called chyme, and that is where the real work starts. The varieties of enzymes, including the bile and the lipase and the various pancreatic enzymes, start acting on it. Okay, and this is, it's considered the duodenum. It can be considered, literally considered, master brewer type thing, organs. And now other things, we didn't talk too much about the liver diseases, because again, that you could do a full class on disease of liver. But the important part is that the liver can, just throwing a word or two here and there about that the liver cancer is rising due to more frequent episodes of hepatitis, primarily the so-called hepatitis B. And now there's a vaccine that is available, but in the present population, that's a big problem type of thing. And now, and in recent past, treatment, antiviral treatment is available for hepatitis, viral hepatitis. But as it turns out, with a lot of new medications, it was when it was marketed by Gilead Pharmaceuticals, it was $1,000 a pill, and it was a 12-week course. So the treatment would end up costing $84,000. Okay. So the treatment was, so now I think there are some newer drugs which I have not researched into it. Well, that's another chapter. Okay. And now this gives us the idea of the intestinal anatomy type of thing. Okay, and let's see if I can zoom in on this. Yeah, it works. I think so. This is, shows the duodenum. The jejunum is lying in between. The ileum, which has to do with basically to do with the hip. That's how the name came about, and the colon wrapped around. And the ileum has a varieties of villi that is shown in this bigger gross anatomy picture. Okay, and and this is again the mucosal level, and the area of this is. You think that the intestine was large, but it's even a larger area with the varieties of fold, and because it needs a huge surface area to absorb. So It's almost the size of several football field when the absorption surface. And intricately, this villi have a very finely evolved mechanism. It not only has a blood supply, but has a lymphatic channel, which is called lectile. And this is how some of the fat that is digested is absorbed through the lectile and goes directly into the bloodstream. Okay, and some of the other part is also transferred to the liver, where the LDL, the fatty particles, are converted into bile acids, okay, and are secreted again, type thing. So, and some of the LDL is utilized for hormone production. It's the hormone molecule of formation of your catecholamines and all the essential hormone, and it's important for cell membrane synthesis and the other parts. Okay, and now this little picture, that is that of when there are disorders with lipid metabolism. This is when the trouble starts, and you can see that the blood, instead of being right, is just pure milk. So that's called a triglycerides. And fortunately, that's not a very common disorder, but this is the triglycerides when they can be markedly elevated. Normally, they should be up below 180 milligrams, but when they're markedly elevated to in the thousands, that can cause some serious problems. This can actually plug up your pancreas and cause, serious pancreatitis due to elevated triglycerides. Okay, and there are, there can be some of these diseases can be genetic. So, and this is one simple way to. It can be measured biochemically, but just this pure appearance of the blood standing is very apparent in this disorder of triglycerides, metabolic abnormalities. Okay, and there are varieties of lipid disorder but that again we would address this when we talked about heart disease. Okay, and this again just shows the more fancier pictures that you thought that the first side was complicated about digestion of the food. That some of the food pathways are enough for people to go and quit medical school, basically. So these are the varieties of proteins, carbohydrates, and there are varieties of pathways. There's a website called Reactome that is available, and that's a very sophisticated website for people who really want to get into the details, But let's go over the salient features of it. We just talked about the three main food groups, and in liver, how the pancreas, in the trypsin we talked about, and it is some of the most powerful protein digesting enzyme, and it's powerful enough that it's secreted in a non-active form, and it becomes active because otherwise it can cause almost auto-digestion of the pancreas. So this is it's secreted in an inactive form called trypsinogen. Okay. And in the same way, so there are varieties of other breakdown of sugars that takes place, and the small change fatty acids. This is the things of the cholesterol, but this is probably a lot more biochemistry than you would ever want to know, type of thing. So we'll gloss over that. Now, and there are varieties of other smaller enzymes that are worth mentioning, type of thing, which we'll talk about secreting a little later on. And there's an interesting little enzyme, which is a nice side bit called somatostatin. And this is a small hormone that actually slows down the growth of other hormones. And why that is important, because that was one of the first enzymes that Genentech synthesized genetically before they got into insulin. So but again, there wasn't a much market for it, but there was their test subject called designing based on recombinant technology. But we'll talk more about it when we talk in the next class, if some of you are in the class, when we talk about gene editing and biotechnology. Okay, again, and this again shows the more details about what the colon does as to how the appendix is at the end, which was designed just so that the surgeon can support their family. And that obviously it has some role in immunology type of thing. And this was, again, this is an interesting story as to how, I think I might have a slide for it about appendectomy when we talk about diseases. So I'll hold off until then. and then the right colon fixture, the left colon flexure, getting down to the descending colon, and then the sigmoid. Now, interestingly, when you do comparative anatomy in rabbits, the sigmoid colon is a lot larger because they have two ways of digestion in of a plant-based diet. So even though we're all mammals, the digestive system has evolved in a different way. Obviously, for those of you who are familiar with cows, know how their stomach's evolution is different. But even the little rabbit has a different evolutionary digestive system. So there are 4 or 5 different types of evolutions of digestive systems. Okay, now again, just to summarize, these are the functions of we're getting down to the bottom, and then we'll take a break. I think hopefully we'll be finishing by that time. Okay, these are the functions of large intestine. Does not have hardly any role in digestion itself, but its primary role in absorbing water, bile salt, various electrolytes, and converting bilirubin. Okay, but the big role of the intestine is houses huge number of intestinal flora that we'll talk about gut microbes in part 3 of today's talk. Okay, and they're it's almost like a whole ecosystem that is lying, as I started out in the beginning, and his role in playing various vitamins, and it also produces gas of flatus. Okay, and it carries out the process of defecation. Okay. So, and those are obviously pretty self-apparent features of the large intestine. And here we are getting to the bottom type of thing. And this is when the food gets down to the bottom. By the way, just to digress, an average person produces about 700 milliliters of flatus per day. Okay, and when the stool reaches rectum, there is urge to evacuate, and this is where our brain plays a role at both ends, as I alluded to earlier. Okay, it tightens the pelvic floor muscles. There's a sling muscle like here. Okay, that is called puborectalis that contracts, and that way you're able to control your urges, so to speak. Okay, and when you're ready, the muscle relaxes, and that's when you're able to pass your stool. And that can be, if there are problems with that, the gastroenterologist can actually do that by putting in contrast and study the emptying mechanism type of thing. And again, for those of you who want to get a hilarious tool, there is a well popular science writer named Mary Roach, who has written a varieties of books, and she really does some original research and goes and interviews a lot of the scientists and writes a very interesting, popular science books. The first book that she had written was called Stiff, which was about the dead bodies. The second book that I recall that I read for this class is called Gulp. Okay, and she talks about the varieties of odd things and about digestion, starting from mouth onwards. Okay. And one side bit was that every hospital has actually almost like a museum of objects that are hidden in people's rectum, and primarily prisoners, type of thing. And the varieties of stuff that people would try to hide in their rectum, it's just mind-boggling, starting from, especially in prisons, or tobacco would be one this thing, but even cell phones, okay, and obviously the so-called mules that were the big, drug in the drug business, and so that is one of the things I think. So now, can one actually carry a bomb? I mean, that's can be thought about, but it's highly, not likely to work that easily, because that would, and the part of the anus is highly innervated. But it's just a fascinating story about the human quirkiness and or ingeniousness, as to whatever you want to call it, the other end type of things. Okay, and because its anus is highly innervated, so that might obviously have a role in sexuality as well, type of thing. Okay, so I think we have gotten to the bottom, and even though we are 5 minutes earlier, we should take a break, and then we can continue with the second part. Okay. I think, Dave, sorry that we spoke at length about fatty liver in the first medical school part one. Okay. And I think so. I'm sorry, I'm at a disadvantage, but that's why I didn't repeat myself, because when we talked about non-alcoholic fatty liver and its interconnectedness with the modern diseases of obesity, diabetes, and hyperinsulinemia. And it's a big epidemic that we talked about at length, and I think we had spent almost 2 hours. That's why I didn't dwell into it. And I think if you didn't receive it, I'll send you the slides, type of thing, and unfortunately I did not save the Zoom lectures, type of thing. So unless somebody else who has saved, can share the link with you, type of thing, because Zoom does not keep it. But I'll be happy to send you the slides of the first medical school class. Okay, does that answer your question, Dave?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, because I think I didn't want to repeat it, because I think we have 10 people who attended part one. I think you and I think a couple of Peter and a couple of other people are new, type of thing. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't dwell a lot into non-alcoholic fatty liver, because I think I got carried away because I got into a book about evolution and diseases called Why We Get Sick. And it's a fascinating story as to how evolution has played a role in, creating the illnesses that we see in modern world, such as cancer, aging-related diseases, So it's a new school of thought, so to speak, and you'll enjoy the slides, type thing. So I'll make sure that I'll send it to you, that if you haven't, if I didn't do that before. Okay. All right. So I think we're approaching 2 o'clock, and I think before we dwell into disease and other stuff, so we still have a moderate amount of material to cover. So I'll take a break and we'll come back in about, get a sip of water, stick around for questions, comment. Let me pause the recording so I don't have a big. All right. So
this meeting is being recorded.
Yes, we got it. Thank you. So, okay, we'll talk now about the common diseases. Let me start with screen share first. Okay, and okay, everybody should be able to see the slide now. Okay, it should say with common diseases. Okay, all right, and yeah. Okay, now we'll start with echinacea. Echinacea, primarily is difficulty in swallowing, and this is where the sphincter trouble starts, the sphincter, has, this is one of the common causes that the sphincter becomes incompetent and how the esophagus becomes dilated, okay? And it's a fairly common problem along with age, and this can cause difficulty with swallowing. And this is a classical radiographic appearance that takes place, and as to how you can see that the bird's beak type of appearance on X-ray type of thing that takes place. And this is, and this can cause, obviously, when you can't swallow, okay, and that can cause a huge amount of weight loss type of thing. And, sorry. Okay. And the peristalsis that was nice even that we described earlier, that becomes abnormal, and there is a problem lies in the lower esophagus that has a problem with relaxation at the lower end, and that's what causes the big spasm. And then one can understand that the pressure inside the esophagus goes up, and the gastroenterologist, the endoscopists, can actually record the pressure as well as can monitor the pH of the thing as to how the acid would be coming in. And so and there are varieties of treatment choices have been attempted and successfully, including a surgical treatment called myomectomy. That was a classical operation that was done along with readjustment of the part of the stomach that is protruding inside, and it's called myomectomy. It's cutting the muscle that was done through. And now it is done with, one has to admire the people who come up with this abbreviation. It's called POEM, so I know it's a per oral endoscopic myotomy. And so this is, and I have, one of my, I'm sorry, my aunt who lives in Southern California during COVID, she had this problem, and from 170 pounds, she was down to 120 pounds, and she had to wait for till the vaccine became available. She got the vaccine, and then somebody at UC Irvine was able to do surgery, and it went well. And so it's, it has changed, avoided the risk of major surgery in elderly people. And obviously, and just goes to show you as a side tip, Botox is not just for face wrinkles, but it has also been used for this particular abnormality. But it, again, the effect does not last that long, so it's not actually a cure or treatment. But somebody who's inoperable or the surgical technique is not available, that has a role, a type of thing. And so this myomectomy is not a new idea. It was described by Sir Thomas Willis as far back as 1672. Okay, and it was carried out almost a couple of 100 years later. But so it's an old treatment. The idea was, and the varieties of mechanisms have been proposed. It may be an autoimmune disease, where the body does not react, and there can be some genetic abnormalities involved with it also. So that's, it's a very common and a very frustrating type of illness. And this is how, they can be, this may be one of the few times where there may be a role of barium examination as to how the modified barium swallow is carried out. And also, it can also, it helps us determine if somebody has aspiration problems also. If the food goes the wrong way, that can be a problem. And that's, again, a fairly common problem. As many as 5 to 8% of population may have difficulty and with difficulty in swallowing. And there are a lot of comorbidities that are associated with it, including spinal abnormalities, just aging process alone. Okay, and in nursing home care facilities, as many as half the people may have some difficulty with this. So this is one way the diagnosis can be established. Now, I think earlier Dave was asking about gastroesophageal reflux type of thing. The esophagus anatomy is different from that of stomach. Okay, the lining of the esophagus is epithelial, and the sphincter controls the flow type of thing. And if the sphincter is incompetent, and there's an ineffective barrier between the esophagus, and it's a fairly common occurrence that the division between two parts is maintained by the sphincter as well as the diaphragmatic muscle. And if there are problems with either one, then the portion of the stomach gets protrudes into the chest cavity, leading to hiatus hernia. Okay, and that's it's a fairly common occurrence related to obesity, sleep apnea, again, and there is oversecretion of acid. And so, and again, there are varieties of studies that are done, fairly sophisticated. The one is called the Bravo study, that is done with endoscopy type of thing that measures the pH. Okay, and it, it's again, the usual treatment is just based on symptoms alone, because that would be the easiest route. And if people are non-responsive, and then that could be refractory symptoms continue, then obviously there is a role for some of these monitoring. And this is a capsule that is inserted, and so that's how the Bravo study is carried out for measuring pH. Okay, and we already talked about the esophageal lining that is made with different cells, because it has to be pretty tough, because people can eat of some fairly large chunks type of thing. I mean, just take a potato chip or tortilla. So the part has to be fairly strong. So the lining is fairly strong and protective. Okay, and then we'll talk a little bit more about so-called Barrett's esophagus, which is an abnormality where it is almost a precancerous condition. Okay, and Barrett, by the way, was an Australian gastroenterologist. Okay, and again, these are some of the more cartoons as to how the sphincter is normally it's closed and the diaphragm is like outside, and if the sphincter is abnormality, then the reflux can take place. Okay, and again, the portion of the stomach is actually inside the across the diaphragm. So that's the cartoon of hiatus hernia. Okay. And this again shows the micrograph that the lining of the esophagus changes, and you can see how the it does not look, if you remember the earlier appearance, how the part is eroded and it becomes angry red looking type of thing. So that's one of the classical endoscopic pictures. But for the sake of time, I didn't put all the endoscopy pictures type of thing. Those are fairly easily available through the Society of Gastroenterology. Okay, and this may be of practical use. How valid that is, that maybe Joel can comment upon it. That the sleep position may be of some beneficial, as to the left sleeping position is associated with lesser acid exposure time and decreased clearance time type of thing. So there may be an advantage on sleeping on the correct side. So in some of the data that look promising. So this was one study that I just thought I'll throw in as a practical advice, type of thing, because obviously I don't have Florida license, so I'm not going to give any medical advice here. Okay. But this is one practical thing that was and it's a fairly respectable source from, was reported type thing. So, and that intervention success rate was at least, nothing to sneeze at by any means, compared to a left sleeping position versus random, control. Okay. All right, and here are some of the photomicrographs of Barrett's esophagus, as we talked about, that the epithelial lining, which instead of epithelial, it almost becomes a different histology that takes place, and that's called Barrett's esophagus, and the lining is turns almost precancerous. Okay, and sorry, some of the slides are rather fuzzy, but I'll try to zoom in a little bit. Okay, and you can see how that the part is a little bit of red, and it looks like a tongue type of appearance. It's the Barrett's esophagus. Okay, and here you can see in the endoscopic picture the same thing as to how it looks red. Okay, and that's a pre-malignant condition, by the way. Okay, and now for something, this is interesting, that I was looking through a series of lectures on medical science. This was a series done through Harvard, something called the Longwood series of lectures. There were about, on different subjects, about 20 lectures type of thing. And there's a whole new discipline called photomedicine. Okay, and here's a guy who's on the cutting edge of research type of thing. So this may be of interest to see something that
is quite brave. What we're going to show right now, what you're going to see right now, is actually the very first time this is done. Here's that's the little camera. That's the OCT pill. He's going to go for it. Yeah, that's what I would do. And he's going to swallow with some water. Now it's on a tether, and at the end, you can pull it right back up out of the stomach. It's not a problem. And here it does. Now it's going to start spinning around in a circle, and as he swallows, as the natural swallowing motion occurs, it collects this data in real time as it goes down, and it can map the entirety of the esophagus. This is technology that's just about in the clinic. This is the kind of thing you're going to see in the next couple of years, and the kind of technology that's going to make your life much easier. Because at the end of the day, instead of taking biopsies, your clinician can take a drive right down your esophagus. So, really neat. This is all from my colleagues, Gary Turney, Brett Bouma, and others at the Wellman Center, who are building these very cool cameras, these very cool tools that I think are going to change medicine in a big way. All right, now we got started late, so I'm going to pretend that.
This is called, the technique is called optical coherence tomography. Okay, and it is done through 2 light waves that are sent and with interference pattern. Okay, so, and there's a whole video for it, type thing, and it's called photomedicine, and that was he's a tenured professor at Harvard, and he talks also about the other measures, 2 or 3 subjects about laser, using light as not only for diagnostic purposes, but also for therapeutic purposes. Okay, and I think Kevin may have some experience with this, type thing, because he had been involved in lasers for a good portion of his career. So he may be more knowledgeable than I am about it, type thing. But the whole principle of this optical coherence tomography is almost like sending light waves and causing interference. Almost reminded me of the gravitational wave lensing that was done in physics type of thing. So the principle brings up a deja vu of Okay, and so and there are varieties of other ways why they are using laser for that, including looking at the healthy tissue and for wound healing and other stuff. So it's a very enlightening video. And if I have time, if we cover precision medicine, I'll put in some slides for that part. Okay, so it's a whole, just like there is a whole textbook of wilderness medicine. Okay, and the same way, this is a discipline called photomedicine. So if you just Google the word, you'll find out a lot of information about it. But again, we're digressing.
Is
so
quite
Okay, now this is matrix to the rescue. We talked about Barrett's esophagus. When we talk about matrix, this is not what we're talking about. Okay, this is an interesting video that you may get talk about.
A patient who had esophageal adenocarcinoma. The lining was actually neoplastic already. It had not invaded below the lining. So we stripped the entire lining out of this esophagus. Now, that's a very dramatic, against the grain, outside the standard of care treatment for this particular disease. And then we took a piece of extracellular matrix, and this happens to be from a pig, the small intestine of a pig. Cells are all removed. All we have is the microenvironmental niche. Wrap this around a balloon, run it up into the denuded esophagus, blow it up. It wallpapers the inside of the denuded esophagus, and then it's held in place with a stent for a couple of days. And what you can see here is the transformation that occurs from, on the upper left, the stripped esophagus, the stent in place, and then when we took the stent out after 2 weeks, you can see we've actually disrupted the new lining, and then here's various times afterwards. Now, those pictures on the lower end of that, especially the last two, are entirely normal. You would never know that there was anything ever wrong with those. And if you look at the histology that goes with that, on the top are the first 5 patients that we did that had the similar diagnosis, adenocarcinoma. The second row represents the remodeled or regrown normal esophageal lining. So this was simply an approach where we did not use stem cells. We did not use any particular signaling molecules. What we tried to do was help Mother Nature out by providing an appropriate environment to say, it's okay for all the cells that invade this acellular material to differentiate into a site-appropriate type of tissue. The best thing about it is this is the patient, Mike, obviously on the right, Blair's on your left. This is the day after surgery. So Mike is doing absolutely great. I just saw him about 8 months ago. He's put on 85 pounds. I said, hey, Mike, this is not the reason we were fixing this. But he absolutely normal. We've done about 14 patients now, and none of them have had any recurrence of cancer. The longest survivors are, I think, 10 years out. The least length of time is somewhere around 2 years or so forth.
Okay, so you get the idea about typing. So now moving on to the more bizarre things, that all of you are familiar with this, and this is, it just bursts as to how much human stomach can be stretched type of thing and this was some unseen amount of consumption type of thing, and this was again, this was the data that was concluded that maximum consumption rate and plasticity, okay, is 834 grams per minute. This is higher than grizzly bears for goodness, type of thing, but lower than that of wolves. So it gets down to 83 hot dogs, in 10 minutes type of thing. So, and this is, so this is the contest that I'm sure you, and I think the guy, the Takaru Kobayashi, so there was another contest somewhere else and his record was consuming 18 pounds of cow brain, and so this was, again, obviously it requires a lot of practice, and they practice by water loading up to a gallon type of thing. And again, somehow along the line, nature is wiser than we are, that the bursting of the stomach is nearly impossible type of thing, because brain has reflexes that if you really, really push yourself to the limit, and you see this, some of the people who are number 2 and number 3, that their lower esophagus sphincter relaxes, their burp or throw up, emesis causes pain and nausea type of thing. So it's just, so there is a way that nature prevents you. So there's like a safety mechanism that is there. So Okay, so I think there have been, I think, Mary Roach, who is, she has a whole chapter on it because she's absolutely a queen of bizarre type of thing. So it's an easy read for those of you who want to read, it's called Gulp type of thing. So, and there is also, for those of you who are more adventurous, she has another book which is written about sex. It was called Bonk. Okay. So that's, and it's an interesting thing as to, she really goes out and I think, I won't digress, but if you're curious, you can read up her work, it's a nice summertime reading perhaps. Okay. And then again, getting to more serious thing, this is the slide worth zooming, And this is about the pH, I was curious about the pH as to how, we referred to earlier that the stomach pH is, we're up there, like we're not too far behind vultures, so I mean, you can interpret it whatever you want to, the type of thing, but, so in terms of pH, the chimps are, further lower down, type of thing. So, and so these are the scavengers and carnivores. So, we want to be carnivores type of thing. So the pH is, but still, stomach does not digest itself because it is protected by a mucin layer type of thing. And the lining regenerates, type of thing. So the parts of the cells that are replaced substantially type thing. And as soon as the food enters the duodenum, and there are various bicarbonates that are secreted and also in the bile, and that helps neutralize it. So duodenum does not have the protective lining, so it you don't end up digesting your innards, so to speak. Okay, and so we already talked about the stomach digestion at length, type of thing. So this is the thick mucus layer has evolved to protect us, type of thing. But this is just the comparative in a chart that I stumbled upon somewhere. Oops, I think, let's see. Okay, I think I lost my share. Slideshow from the current slide. Okay, yeah, we're in business now. Okay, and now this will get into the ulcer. And I just thought this was hilarious that when I and Dr. Burchett or Joan were in school, this is what we were talking about. The ulcer is due to type A personality, stress, and here's this thing. What is this I hear about you not having an ulcer? Okay, and I thought that was the state of the art, and I think I remember.
I think you've lost sharing of your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't hit. Yeah, I stopped the screen. So I have to hit that again. Yeah. And thanks for pointing it out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Share screen. To share. Okay. I think we should be in business now. Can you see it now? Can you see the slide now?
Yes, good.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, got it. Thank you. Otherwise, and I will minimize this. So. Okay, all right, yeah, now I'm good. Okay, moving right along. So this is okay, and this is again, we talked about the acid in the stomach, that type of thing. So this is there are the varieties of the lining is fairly sophisticated. This is the gastric line. The parietal cells are the ones that secrete the acid. There are a variety of cells that secrete other hormones. And then obviously the mucus cell at the surface that protects type of thing. And so you can see how the different cells have different evolutionary mechanism. And this is the electron micrograph as to how the layer is stored on top. Okay. All right. And the pH, we already talked about that. It's almost close to battery acid type of thing. Okay. And I have to minimize my slide because I'm using my toolbar. Okay. And the parts of the stomach acid, it changed dramatically back in 1983, I should say, that the one Australian pathologist was seeing bacteria when he looked at the stomach, or people in those days, the surgeries were not uncommon, partial gastrectomy and vagotomy. well, means cutting down the vagus nerve and removing part of the stomach was a fairly frequent operation. And this was before the days of, the powerful acid neutralizing agents that are available now. Okay, and so the pathologists were looking at it. They kept seeing some of this bacteria at the bottom of the stomach, and this is again and they were puzzled by what that means, type of thing, as to whether that was an incidental finding or what role did that have to play. And their hypothesis was that they were playing a role in causing stomach ulcer. And obviously, a lot of the establishment poo-pooed their idea, type of thing. And it's a fascinating story in medicine, type of thing, as to how the two, and he obviously, Dr. Warren, who's a scientist, and Dr. Barry Marshall, who's a clinician, they worked together. And the story is Dr. Barry Marshall ingested the cocktail of H. pylori himself. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, he did get the ulcer. They did the biopsy and were able to prove that the bacteria were at the bottom of the biopsy material. Okay, and obviously, and with the usual waiting time of about 20 plus years, these two scientists were awarded Nobel Prize in 2005. And this is the cartoon picture of H. pylori, and these are the real bacteria at the bottom of the microscopic side. And this is the electron microscope. This is the cartoon, actual, and electron microscope. And this bacteria is not a new finding. They were there for eons, but evolutionarily, they evolved with humans. They're present in about 50% of global population, type of thing. Okay, as to whether they are, they've been, now they're far less in the Western world, and that may have something to do with our cleanliness or so-called hygiene status, type of thing. And whether they're beneficial or not, that remains to be seen. Some of the people who are doing the research on microbiome said that suppressing the bacteria may not have been all that is absolutely beneficial, because it may have been giving some protection against various autoimmune diseases such as asthma, Crohn's disease, various diarrheal diseases, and also may have played some role in giving protections against tuberculosis, because obviously the area where the H. pylori was, ubiquitous, tuberculosis was also rampant. So, so there might have been some beneficial role, because otherwise, they would not have, survived for this many decades. Type of thing. Okay, and again, this is a obviously the ulcer is not innocuous. It can cause serious problems and bleeding, which is one of the few times, one of the main reasons, rather, gastroenterologists have to
Hours
wake up.
after presentation of the patient is the standard of care in patients with acute upper gastrointestinal bleeding. The goals of early endoscopy are to determine the cause of bleeding, to assess the risk of further bleeding according to the appearance of the bleeding lesion, and, if indicated, to administer endoscopic therapy. The peptic ulcer, in this example, has eroded through the mucosa and submucosa into an underlying artery that produces the bleeding. The ulcer base is covered by a fibrin exudate. The non-bleeding visible vessel, composed of the artery and clot plugging the defect in the side wall of the artery, appears as a nipple-like protuberance in the ulcer base. Endoscopic hemostasis treatments include injection, thermal, and mechanical therapies, or a combination of these techniques. In injection therapy, a 25-gauge injector sclerotherapy needle is passed through the working channel of a large, single-channel or double-channel therapeutic endoscope. Injection mediums consist of saline, vasoconstrictors, sclerosing agents, tissue adhesives, or a combination of these. Injections are typically made into the 4 quadrants surrounding the bleeding site. Injection directly into the underlying vessel is not recommended. Submucosal injections of 0.5 to 2 milliliter aliquots are recommended, and multiple injections per quadrant are usually performed. The technique of submucosal injection provides a volume tamponade effect plus possible local vasoconstriction and platelet plug facilitation. The endoscopist should observe the raising and subsequent blanching of the targeted and surrounding mucosa. Injection of diluted epinephrine or saline alone as monotherapy is inadequate and should be avoided. Instead, injection of epinephrine plus saline in a 1 to 10,000 dilution, followed by injection of another agent or combined with contact thermal therapy, is preferred. Thermal therapies use either contact methods, such as multipolar electrocoagulation or a heater probe, or non-contact methods, such as argon plasma coagulation. This animation demonstrates the use of a contact thermal probe. A large 10 French probe is recommended that has been placed into the working channel of a large single-channel or double-channel therapeutic endoscope. The target site may appear as an active bleeding vessel that is spurting or oozing, or as a non-bleeding visible vessel. The probe should be placed directly over the target site and pressure applied to cause indentation of the targeted tissue with compression of the underlying vessel while delivering thermal energy. This action is referred to as coaptive coagulation, and its aim is to weld the artery shut. Treatment should continue until the active bleeding has stopped, or the protuberance of the non-bleeding visible vessel has been completely flattened. The endoscopist should observe a post-hemostasis depression or footprint on completion of the contact thermal therapy.
Okay, I think this this shows the varieties of methods. I think it's a fairly long video type of thing, but okay, well, I'll send a link to the video type of thing. So I didn't realize it was time consuming. We still have quite a way to get down to the bottom, so to speak. Literally.
Confirming their powers after present.
And so this is an easier way of explaining these things. It's like how just varieties of methods that are available type of thing. The coagulation, heater probe, injection of a sclerosing alcohol type solution, and argon plasma, and putting in a clip, so to speak, over the blood, hemostatic powder spray right here. Okay, so varieties of measures that are available, so to speak, to the endoscopy. So they have, just like cardiologists, they have a lot of tools, at their disposal now. Okay. Now again, so we think for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk too much about diabetes. Just a word about obesity. Diabetes. Again, I've always been curious with this word. That diabetes, the one that straddles siphon, excessive urine, and again, we're all aware of the diabetic epidemic that is, sweeping, over the last 30, 40 years. We talked about it in part 1 at length, type of thing. Okay, and the word's origin, melitasis means sweet, so that's how the word originated, type of thing. Okay, and again, this was hilarious, type thing. I showed it to somebody else. Start cola sooner. How can anyone consume that much sugar? So and now this is a couple of these things as to how intricately digestion is connected with obesity, and it's more complicated than just the simple calorie in, calorie out. When we were in school, this was the standard American textbook that we read as an alternative to British textbook. This was the standard physiology textbook by Guyton. This is all it had to say about adipose tissue, the fat cells, that basically stores. This was all that sort of paragraph that it had about adipose tissue type of thing. But again, as we have learned that the matter is a lot more complicated. There are varieties of hormones that have been discovered in recent past, including leptin and again, adiaporectin, okay, that play a major role. Leptin mouse studies, the leptin deficiency, that type of thing can make mouse fat, type of thing, and because it lets the brain know as to how much should we eat, basically, type of thing. So the hormonal and nutritional clues actually go to the brain, and the brain needs to know basically what you have eaten, what you're going to eat, and what are the long-term goals. So that's where the leptin, so-called fat hormone, plays a part. Okay, and on the other hand, adiapectin is a protective hormone. Okay, and so these are all secreted in the guts and are transmitted, to the brain. And there is actually a center in the brain, which controls some of the food intake. So obesity is a lot more complicated than what we were told initially. So that's why a lot of people have difficulty losing weight. Okay, and again, so it ties in just to, I won't elaborate over this point, but the adipose tissue, the leptin, occurs on varieties of neurons, which are called POMC neurons, and that interacts with something called the melanocortin pathway in your brain, and it has a relationship with severe obesity. And people with obesity deficiency, as you can see, they can get massively obese. And this initially, the animal research also proved that. Okay, let's see if I have the other pictures. Yeah, and this is the picture of the mice. As you can see, how they just can't stop eating, and the mouse just becomes. And fortunately, and this is not just animal studies, there is an equivalent of deficiency of, you can see this, fortunately, this syndrome is very rare, but these kids are born normal at birth. And you can see the hyperphagia that just takes over. And by the time they're 3 to 5, they just almost, their parents have a tough time that they have to almost lock the refrigerator because they'll eat even frozen food. Okay, so it's a really very tragic type of illness as to how hormonal imbalance is tied in with obesity. So it's a classic example of it. And again, and how the mechanism is related to their immune function as well. And they respond to leptin therapy, and also there are some excellent results that have been obtained, that thing. Okay, but unfortunately, when people tried it for obesity, the molecule did not work. So again, now going down further down the gut, very common illness, diverticulitis. Just a word or two. It's about 1 in 10 infection. Again, the lack of fiber, has a lot to do with the type of food that we eat. The intestine have a little pouches, that get infected, type of thing with the change in the bacterial flora, and it can, it can be treated conservatively, but it does not, if it doesn't respond, it does require surgery. Okay, so again, the diet, and again, I won't say too much about probiotics because again, it's hard to find the, and if we have time when we talk about personalized medicine, there may be more to say about it, but actually the bacteria that you can buy on the store, they don't have a whole lot of benefit because the companies that manufacture are not well regulated, and they grow bacteria that are easy to grow, like lactobacillus, and a lot of them do not make it to their intestine, basically, type of thing. So eating more appropriate fiber-rich diet may be more beneficial than spending your hard-earned dollars to buying probiotics. And that's what the consensus opinion is, so to speak. So high fiber diet. Okay. And again, a word or two about the bile and cholesterol. Again, like based on gallstones are a fairly common occurrence, which has to do with the diet, genetics, and other factors. And the fat breakdown plays a big role. And again, I'm not going to dwell too much into this thing, but a very common occurrence type of thing. And again, before politically correct medical school teaching, we were all taught to memorize, as to who is prone to a gallstone, a fat, fertile female, okay, type of thing. So the 4 F's that we were taught to memorize, but I doubt nowadays that they're doing that. Okay, and I'm sure, Joel remembers that some of the mnemonics that we were told to memorize. Okay, and again, the more serious illness, and then I didn't put in a slide for the gallbladder, which is again nowadays, instead of being in the hospital, it's just done through laparoscopy, and that's where imaging shines, and just a few days ago there was a whole talk that I listened to about the benefit versus the overuse of imaging technology in medicine. So in our class in winter, we may address that as to how the technology has been useful and has saved unnecessary surgery. But at the same time, it has caused unnecessary anxiety, starting with obviously the mammogram is a good example. Okay. Now, moving further down to pancreatitis, the classic example that I already alluded to was triglycerides. And the more common cause is alcohol, obviously, and that can cause, and pancreatitis, it's a very high mortality type of thing, as you can imagine. It's a very touchy organ, to put it mildly, type of thing. And so, and again, I think we're not going to talk too much about diabetes, because it's a whole spectacular lecture. So I'm just going to go over some of this, skip over some of the slides. And the classic discovery from insulin onwards to the newer drugs type of thing. Okay, and the word or two about liver that I mentioned to a little bit about some of the common causes of liver disease, fatty liver from poor dietary habits and increased sugar intake type of thing, which is the new epidemic, and the big increase of fructose, or quote unquote supersize me, that we talked about in the first class ad nauseum. And the second common cause would be cirrhosis, okay, and that's the more common epidemic, that is the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, going by the acronym NAFLD, type of thing. So that's the common reason. The other most common cause is the viral infection, viral hepatitis, and there are varieties of viruses starting from A to E, okay, and the vaccine for that is available. And as you can see, that when the liver develops fibrosis, okay, and that can increases the pressure in the veins, causing the engorgement of the veins that not only enlarge in the liver, but also enlarge around the gastroesophageal junction, and can cause one of the other major cause of bleeding, which can be a profuse bleeding, which is esophageal varices. Varices means the varicose veins that you see in your feet, on your legs. The similar process occurs internally and can be a cause of massive bleeding, and can be, unless treated appropriately. And in the old days, it was treated with varieties of tubes. And for those of you who are, especially, I'm sure Joel remembers the name, there was a special tube called Sangstacken tube that was placed in. But nowadays, obviously, gastroenterologists can take care of it within a matter of a few hours, type of thing. So, and again, I already talked about the vaccine, and I think Joel may want to share his story about Dr. Baruch Bloomberg. This is appropriate time if he wants to share that story, Joel. Please go ahead if you have time, or if you unmute yourself.
Briefly, I'll tell the story. I had a patient, a woman that came to see me, and I diagnosed that she had hepatitis B. And at that time, we had A and hepatitis B, and then later you had addition to the alphabet. But anyway, so I explained it very carefully to her, or at least I was in the process of explaining it to her. And she said, just a minute, she said, let me call my uncle, Baruch, and I'd like for you to talk to him because he knows something about this. So anyway, she called and she put me on the phone. And so I started to explain to him. I mean, I knew that he had recently gotten the Nobel Prize for his work on hepatitis B. And here he was calling me, about his niece and so on. So I began to explain to him why I made the diagnosis of hepatitis B with his niece and so forth. And he said, after just a few minutes, he said, Joel, he said, you don't need to tell me all that. He said, you know more than I know about hepatitis B. He said, I'm sure you're doing fine and she's going to do very well. He was a Nobel Prize winner, I mean, I was absolutely taken away with that. And just, it was a funny incident.
Okay, so there was he was a Nobel Prize winner in 1976 for hepatitis C antigen, and he was an amazing researcher. And he also later on continued to work. He developed a vaccine for this. And unlike a lot of the recent trends, he did not, give away for free, basically. And the two Brits or ex-Brits, may get a kick out of it, that he was a red-blooded American, and he was also the master of the Balliol College. Okay, so that's some high honor in the English Oxbridge culture, obviously, to be the master of the Balliol College type thing. So it may surprise you that as to how the talent did travel the other way around. Okay. Now I think we're not going to talk too much about diabetic treatment, because I think I only have about 10 minutes, now people can, it's just like I threw in the slide initially when I thought I didn't have enough material. Okay, but as usual, I think I've overdone myself, So I think so. This is basically about diabetes and just a nod to Beck's and venting, but it's a whole different class, And I think if if someday if I do part 3, I may do about endocrine. So I'll hold off till then. Okay, and moving on to the more important gastroenterological illnesses, which we need to definitely go through, is the UC. Does not stand for University of California, but for ulcerative colitis. And the other disease is Crohn's disease. And IBD stand for inflammatory bowel disease. And all these diseases are fairly, chronic and, can be with some serious consequences. But they all have some subtle differences. The ulcerative colitis primarily affects large intestine lining, while Crohn is a sort of patchy disease and includes the whole wall, while irritable bowel syndrome is not that much of an inflammation. But these are all autoimmune diseases type of thing, and maybe and they require the grades can differ in terms of severity type of thing. And you can see these little cartoons that I've copied in the slide here. They're pretty self-explanatory, and so I can just see if I can zoom in. Ulcerative colitis affects the entire large colon, as you can see, while the Crohn's disease is a sort of any part of from ileum to the anus. And the worst thing about Crohn's disease is they can get fistulas at the lower end. It can be pretty uncomfortable and risky type of thing, to put it mildly. Okay, and these are again their immune cells react against your own study, the macrophages and the varieties of cell that Dr. Spector may have talked at length about, the T cells, the mast cells, the natural killer cells. They all attack your own tissue, causing problems type of thing. So this is the whole inflammatory cascade that starts with the cells that are attacking, and the varieties of inflammatory chemicals called cytokinins that are released type of thing. And that's one of the reasons. But initially, obviously, the treatment of choice was with steroids, and that was this. And various sulfa drugs had some value as to of value. That was the state of the arts when I was doing my rotations at that time. But lately, the monoclonal antibodies and other drugs have revolutionized some of the treatment of the drugs type of thing. Okay, well, see, and this is again some of the more pictures. These are not for the faint-hearted, but you can see how some of the gut lining, it just looks gross, to be put it mildly. It's actually pus and inflamed tissue. So one does not need to be a GI person to be, it's just like with naked eye, one could see that the tissue does not look healthy type thing. So, okay, so, and again, we're talking about the monoclonal therapy. This was the granddaddy of the drugs, one of the earliest drugs, Humira, and the catchy name that was marketed initially for other autoimmune condition, RE, rheumatoid arthritis, and then the abbreviation stands for human monoclonal antibody for rheumatoid arthritis. And again, since it actually did work, not only just for rheumatoid arthritis, but for other autoimmune conditions such as ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, and this was again, I had to. It says this was one of the craziest thing that the Medical Research Council of UK did, that they discovered monoclonal antibodies in 1970s, but somewhere along the line they didn't get around to patenting it. Okay, and then they and obviously when Maggie Thatcher became prime minister, she was obviously she was a chemist, and she was absolutely furious with this mistake that was done type of thing. And eventually they did negotiate something, and they got it like a 2% of or so of royalty from Abbott, who actually developed varieties of drugs, because at that time the British pharmaceutical houses such as Smith, Glaxo Pharmaceutical, and AstraZeneca, they are not interested in developing these biological agents. But the American companies were, as it has happened with the light bulb, had a lot more initiative, and they went on. And not only said, this is again, we'll talk more about it in our future classes that Joel and I plan to do, hopefully. And this is the price of the how much the middleman makes it type of thing. as to how the pharmacy benefit agents, as to how the list price and versus the price paid, so it's a substantial markup that takes place, not just in Humira, but in all the other drugs. And there are some other agents that were developed later on, which are the tumor necrosis factor alpha inhibitors that have been developed later on. I know that called Remicade is the brand name. And again, so these are billion-dollar drug sales, and but the cost is just nothing to sneeze at for all this, So, okay, all right, so. Okay, and this is again word or two about celiac disease, which has to do with it's a genetic abnormality, and again, it's not as common as you think, type of thing, but there's definitely a human leukocyte antigen genetic abnormalities that take place, and these people are gluten sensitive, and this is about 1 in 50 to 1 in 200, where the exposure to the protein will cause the villi to be abnormal. Okay. And they can also have other conditions associated with arthritis. And so it's not an allergic or immune reaction, type of thing, but it's a sensitivity to gluten that takes place, So this is some of the underlying science of enteropathy with celiac disease. Okay. And again, getting down to the colon, polyps and colon cancers, it's a major health problem. Fourth most common cancer, okay, lung, prostate, and breast being the top 3, and it's a lifetime risk. It's about 6%, and this is for those of you who are following medical news, may have read the recent story that came out from one of the European trials about the usefulness versus in terms of or non-usefulness of questioning the benefit of colonoscopy, and that has been making the news recently, last couple of days, and it was the lead article in the New England Journal this month, type of thing. So, and again, obviously, now this where they don't have the standard recommendation in. This was, I think, done in Northern Europe, and so these were people who were invited and not to go under colonoscopy, people who are at risk in certain age group, but then not everybody responded to the invitation, and so that as to how the data was collected, that leaves the study to be some interpretation and some controversy type of thing. So, okay, so the jury is not out on it yet, but the American recommendation, still some of the U.S. doctors have said, hey, no, we don't buy this completely. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out as to whether that is holds or whether it changes the recommendation type of thing. So, and and so we already talked about the colonoscopy in the lead, and these are the 2 pictures of the screening in the virtual colonoscopy, which is done with CAT scanning. But the big disadvantage of this thing is that the prep that is required, which all of you who have undergone, it's one of those things as to most people would swear, never again. But the prep is still same for virtual colonoscopy, but you can't take out the polyps at the same time. So it doesn't make sense for me to sign up for so-called virtual colonoscopy, because if you're normal, yes, you can get away without it. It's almost like a computerized tomographic angiogram of the heart. If you're normal, yes, you have avoided an invasive procedure. But on the other hand, if you have a blockage or if you have a polyp, you're still committed to a second procedure in the first place. And so these are some, and there are some rare disease of colon which are occur in childhood. The one that is known as Hirschsprung disease, where the colon dilates, type of thing. And it is, I don't know, this may have to be taken with a grain of salt, that the Elvis Presley suffered with constipation all his life, and it is possible that he had problem with Valsalva and stool infection, and he might have suffered with megacolon type of thing. So, and again, so there is actually an entity called bedpan death, because it's obvious one can realize that the squatting position is a lot more useful for bowel movement, and giving bedpan and asking people to strain is exactly not the most physiologically healthy thing, type thing. And pulmonary embolism is not uncommon type of thing. In fact, of one of my senior associates in Green Bay. He died in the doctor's lounge on the toilet, because he was also a prostate cancer patient, and as to whether that caused the death with pulmonary embolism or not, so I think I've had some close experience with that might have contributed to it, that thing. And last but not the least, this is something that we were talking about, physical examination, benefit versus lack. I mean, at least when we were in medical school, we were taught that there is something called McBurney's point. There is a point tenderness at the mid junction in the right inguinal area. And that's one of the ways the so-called one can diagnose. And this picture, and this is called the lily white appendix. That means in the old days, when the surgeons did surgery, about 30% of the people had, did the appendectomy, but didn't need it. So it avoided, so the scanning avoided the unnecessary surgery. This is the picture with the ultrasound. It shows the inflamed appendix and the increased uptake of the inflamed tissue type of thing, and also done with CT scanning. So it has avoided, how the imaging has changed type of thing, as to how it has avoided unnecessary surgery. So there's a word or two about appendix. Okay, and colon cancer, again, we talked about, the risk factors and the controversy. And again, there are the two types of tests, obviously, if you watch late night television, and Cologuard is advertised very vigorously. And the reason that is advertised is a DNA testing, and the cost of that is $700 versus the fecal immunological test, which if you're part of Medicare, your company may be sending you type of thing. It was interesting as to talk about the waste in medicine. We just did that about 6 months ago, and it was negative. And lo and behold, I get another packet from Aetna. Okay, you should have another one. So I have no idea as to why I need another one in less than 6 months, but that's, that remains to be interpreted type of thing. So, and there are varieties of other technologies that are available, which are more invasive, the direct visualization. But this is a simply easy way to do this, the fecal immunological test. So it may not be the most, easy way to collect the samples, but it's definitely worth doing, and strong recommendations type of thing. And the data of that is solid, so I have the data on the slide, but for sake of time, I shan't dwell into it. Again, last but not the least, constipation, the definition, less than 3 bowel movements. It has a lot to do with varieties of illness. And it may surprise somebody with neurology interest that may be one of the earliest symptoms of Parkinsonism. Okay. And again, the varieties of testing. And the good people in Bristol has devised a stool scale. Okay. And I think now I could not make this slide a little bit bigger type of thing. And I was too lazy to copy it out, but let's see if we can zoom it out for type of thing. Nope. Yeah, my slides are harder to see that I can't get the exact. Okay, yeah, here we go. Type 1 stool, okay. Type 2 stool, okay. So thank goodness we're talking this after several hours after lunch, and not certainly before lunch, but these are the varieties of stools that were classified. Okay. So this is, this is reduction in science taken to the max type of thing. So, okay. So these are varieties of way of can describe how useful that is to the clinician that I think maybe Joel is more qualified to answer that than I am type of thing. So again, the importance of appropriate diet is to be emphasized. Okay, lastly, we're getting down to the bottom, okay, hemorrhoids, okay. So even the presidents are not immune to it, and when Jimmy Carter, when he was in office, when he was that made the news, it just jogged my memory. Okay, and this is the part of the vascular tissue that is engorged and inflamed, and that's, the treatment is banding and obviously appropriate diet, and still this is important, okay. So I think we've got to the bottom of, last but not the least, okay, this is again, thanks to Mary Roach, and even I think I knew about it from the so-called leak factor, the colon gases. A lot of that is hydrogen, methane, hydrogen sulfide, again, and this was a riot type of thing. This is a French guy who had actually made a career. His name was Joseph Pujol, okay, and he could actually sing varieties of tunes including Lamarse. Okay, and he actually had a show, and he was fairly rich. He almost made almost $250,000 in those days. So he was a big hit, type of thing in France, type of thing. So this was it just shows anything about this is about people's sense of humor, type of thing. So and this is again, so we talked about the 80% of flight is hydrogen, methane. Okay, they're both odorless, and but then they're small. Okay, and why a colonoscopy prep is so rigorous? Because you do not want small pockets of gas that is hidden there to explode, because they sometimes use cautery. So that's why they use gas mannitol and sorbitol for prep type of thing. Okay, and so this is the smelling chemicals that are dimethyl sulfide, okay, and hydrogen sulfide, type thing. Now, this may shock that women have more flatus than men, and there are other type of chemicals, which are, you can see the formulas later on, which smell like rotten vegetables, and some of the smells are actually different type of thing. Okay, now why? Now, a lot of the animals across the animal kingdom or mammals will eat their poop actually. Now, but in some of the cultures, some of the part of the feces are considered part of a delicacy. In Inuit cuisine, raw ptarmigan feces is used as a delicacy. And again, I think we talked about it about the Hopi Luwak coffee, which is that is passed through the seeds, are passed through the poops, and that is considered rather expensive coffee. And there is also varieties of cheese called kasu marzu that uses digestive process of live maggots to help ferment and break down the cheese's fats. So it's just that it's a varieties of trivia that obviously we're all dying to know. Okay. And I don't think we'll talk too much about the gut microbes, that's a whole class. And I think I can finish the lecture recording type of thing, and I'll be happy to include that. But I think I'll just go through the slides quickly, the importance of gut microbe, type thing. So, because otherwise, people, if you have to sign off, please feel free to do so, type of thing. So, and it is the big thing as we talked about earlier, and the part one, again, initially when you're born, the gut is sterile. We incorporate bugs as soon as we are born, primarily through vaginal delivery type of thing. Okay, and the breastfeeding is a lot more important because it gives you the right healthier flora type of thing. And again, our diet flora changes as we age type of thing. Okay, and it has a huge role in playing, in terms of healthy or non-healthy thing. And varieties of experiments were done in malnourished thing as to how the different gut flora had effect in whether these malnourished babies. There are two types of illnesses, marasmus, which is called the protein calorie malnutrition. These children look just horrible. They almost look like little baby monkeys, so to speak, And kwashiorkor, which is the primarily protein deficiency. These are seen. I saw some of them in India in the 60s. Obviously, now it has become far less after the Green Revolution. But again, it's a lot more common in sub-Saharan Africa. And this was a study that was done comparatively with the microbes as to in the same family of the feeding that was done. And the response to the diet supplement had a lot to do with the intestinal flora as to how these children responded or not. So it showed as to how, even with the same treatment, the gut microbiome had a huge role to play in helping these children. Okay, so and the gut microbe evolves over the lifespan. It becomes from a favorable to unfavorable, and that may contribute to a lot of the aging-related diseases, as we talked about. And again, it's a list of the illnesses that are associated with gut microbe is quite long, as you can see, starting from obesity, the fatty liver disease that we talked about, teeth, and cancer. So, and even some of the neurological diseases such as Parkinson's have been, associated or suspected to have a role with the gut microbial flora.
Damn.
Okay. Okay, and again, the guts have a huge role in the immune system because normally you can see the intestinal layer is intact but again, with the wrong microbial flora, that can get injured. And again, the bacteria that are normally commensal or helpful that can penetrate and trigger the immune response, causing the autoimmune diseases. So the cycle may start, starting with the E. coli, the normal bacteria, the bacteroids and other stuff that, and some of the names you may recognize, the TH, the macrophages, and the various T cells that are included in pairs patched in the intestinal wall, and that causes tissue reaction and inflammatory process. The cascade sets in. So these are some of the intricate relationship that has been proposed and well established now. And again, so we talked about the relationship already with the brain that affects, type of thing, and as to how interconnected the body is, that is fascinating type of thing. Okay, and I think we're done with this part. So sorry for the extra 10 minutes. And now I think hopefully I can stand some feedback from somebody as to whether we should talk more about system disease. Or I think next time I'm going to just start going about kidney disease. I'm just to talk about cancer because I have some lot of interesting material, which is bread and butter to most of us. And then if we have time, we'll talk more about some personalized medicine and stem cells on day 4. But I think I'll spend the session 3 about talking about cancer, the origin of cancer, and some of the basic disease pathology, as well as some of the treatment alternatives that are available and the success and the failure that we have had. Okay, I'll stop my screen share, and I'll stick around for our questions and answers as may be. Okay, all right.